This is important. Irma and Elsa were fast-moving hurricanes, and we got storm surge out of both of them. Unfortunately, Hurricane Ian's forward speed is expected to slow in the Gulf of Mexico. When I say forward speed, I'm talking about how physically fast the hurricane is moving across the actual Gulf of Mexico. That plays a gigantic role in the potential storm surge values along the Gulf Coast of Florida. A way to think about this is to watch this video here. If I was to ask you to count how many trees you see go by, this video, it's pretty easy. We're chugging along pretty slowly. I can collect my thoughts. I can easily look around. I can scoop up data. Now, count how many trees you see in this video. Yikes, it's going by way too fast. I can't possibly collect enough information. Hurricanes work the same way. The slower a storm is, the more storm surge and rain it brings as compared to a faster storm. A slower moving hurricane has more time to look around, gather water, and push it toward shore as compared to a faster moving hurricane, which can skip across the water much faster. Elsa and Irma were faster moving storms. And right now, based on the steering current influence, it looks like Ian's going to start to slow down when it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And again, that increases the risk of storm surge. It is very important that, especially if you live in a storm surge vulnerable part of our area, you recognize when the threat begins, because the storm surge risk does not start tomorrow with the arrival of rain bands. Your storm surge risk is low throughout the entire day on Tuesday. This is why. On Tuesday, look at these wind arrows. The wind is all blowing offshore, so water will be moving from our coastline out into the deeper waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The winds really start to pick up here on Tuesday night, but again, it's an offshore wind. Things drastically start to change on Wednesday depending on the final track that Ian takes. But the opportunity is there for a very high risk of storm surge, especially through late Wednesday afternoon and through Wednesday night. Look at the reason why. By 8 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, our winds are no longer offshore. They're starting to have more of a southern component, piling up the water and pushing it toward the shoreline. And especially through the second half of Wednesday and Wednesday evening, notice that especially with this particular forecast model, south of that center, we could have a substantial and strong and prolonged period of time with onshore winds. Again, lots of time for that hurricane to gather up water from the Gulf and push it toward shore. This is why it is so important that you take action now if you live in an area that's vulnerable to storm surge. This, again, is looking at a reasonable worst-case scenario, not a forecast, but in a reasonable worst-case scenario, what saltwater storm surge flooding could look like. This is the reason that Punta Gorda is under an evacuation right now. If you look into Lee County, the values vary, of course, from place to place, but notice here in parts of Cape Coral, the potential is there in a reasonable worst-case scenario of more than 3 feet of saltwater flooding. If you're asked to evacuate, please do so. And if you live in some of these areas that are vulnerable to storm surge, if you're going to act, the time to act is basically now. Because again, like we showed you with Futurecast, rain bands start to arrive on Tuesday, and the storm is just off our shoreline on Wednesday when you need to be hunkered down wherever you ride out this particular hurricane. We'll be back with more complete and comprehensive coverage coming up right after this. This is going to lead to pretty devastating storm damage, especially here in the next 45 minutes across the western side of Charlotte County, and that includes the Englewood area as you look live there toward the Gulf of Mexico. If I may, if I could ask the control room, let's come back out here and talk about the impacts for the people who are on land here. We were earlier pixel querying some of these points. Based on where the radar is at, we're still seeing evidence here up and aloft where the radar beam is hitting the raindrops of winds in the atmosphere here that are coming in at higher than 130 miles an hour. Based on the scans here just over top of Burnt Store Marina toward Pirate Harbor, as the radar beam is shot out from the radar tower at the point in the atmosphere, which in this case is a few thousand feet up, it's showing the winds are blowing at 139 miles an hour. Now at the surface it's typically a touch lower, but because we're dealing with the eye of a hurricane here and we have evidence of the sustained winds around the eye still at 155 miles per hour, there could be some extremely serious wind damage here in areas of western Charlotte County as the eye wall, the leading edge of the eye wall, moves further into areas of western Charlotte County and over the mouth of Charlotte Harbor and areas here eventually toward Port Charlotte and Punta Gorda. I know you've had a lot thrown at you over the past 30 days, so here are 10 simple numbers that help to, at least to a degree, summarize the incredible events that have unfolded before us over the last month. The first number is 1. That's the number of months that have gone by since the strongest storm in southwest Florida history made landfall in our community. 2 is the number of days it took Hurricane Ian to go from a Category 1 hurricane in the Caribbean on September 26th to a Category 4 hurricane off the coast of Lee County on September 28th. 3 is the time of day when Ian made its official landfall. It happened at 3:05 p.m. on Cayo Costa. That's when the center of the eye came on shore. 4 is the category level on the Saffir-Simpson scale when Ian reached peak intensity. 5 is the number of hours it took Ian to travel just 40 miles. It's one of the reasons the storm surge was so bad and why the rainfall totals were so great. 6 is the number of consecutive days that parts of Lee County were inside the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. Remember, the cone only shows you where the center of the storm is likely to go. Impacts always extend beyond the center of the forecast cone. Always have, always will, period, end of story. 7 is the incredibly short number of days it took for crews to reestablish land connection between Cape Coral and Matlacha. 8, or more specifically, 8.79. That's the average number of inches of rain picked up in Charlotte County during the storm. Though it's a lot, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the 15.7 inches of rain that fell on average in Sarasota County. 9 is the number of days many members of our community were without electricity after the storm. At one point, though, there were more than 2.6 million customers in Florida in the dark. And finally, 10. 10 feet marks the baseline of the storm surge inundation flooding that's been observed on Fort Myers Beach. In fact, anywhere to 10 to 15 feet of salt water was able to wash over parts of the island, making this one of the worst storm surge events in Florida history.
7:03, NBC2 has been tracking every move of Hurricane Nicole. The storm first made landfall on the other coast of Florida. We've been keeping you up to date with all the damage that we've been watching as well. NBC2's First Alert meteorologist Rob Duns is joining us live right now from Vero Beach. And Rob, how are things looking this morning?
Well, they are looking a lot better than they were last night because, of course, Josh, Vero Beach right here is where Hurricane Nicole made landfall. Now, thankfully, we are not seeing anything like what we saw on our coast with Hurricane Ian. There's no major structural damage to things here. There's a few broken branches now and then, but we're not seeing anything nearly as bad as what we had, of course, in our community back during the month of September. However, curiosity is starting to get the best of people. As you'll notice, there are lots of people walking up and down the beach here, and so much so that the police have begun to get involved. This is the boardwalk, and over the last few hours, the police and the city of Vero Beach have had to put up these wooden barricades because we have noticed over the last 4 hours there have been a lot of people taking down the yellow caution tape or going underneath the yellow caution tape. Now that is super dangerous because crews have not had the time to inspect this boardwalk, and as soon as we got here we started taking some video, and when you see the video for yourself as to what the boardwalk condition looks like in other places, you'll understand why the city is concerned that people are going past the caution tape to check it out. There was some serious beach erosion here overnight and very early this morning. The waves are simply eating away the sand underneath the Vero Beach boardwalk. And there's a number of places, especially to the north of where we are, where the boardwalk has simply broken off and is now floating in the Atlantic Ocean. And because of the wave action, you can see like a staircase that just goes back and forth as it is caught in the surf. So thankfully, again, no major structural damage as you would expect with a Category 1 hurricane, but things like boardwalks on the barrier islands, they always take a beating, even if it's just a Category 1 or a tropical storm. And hopefully crews will be able to inspect this bridge and perhaps more importantly close it down a bit stronger to keep curious onlookers from going past the boardwalk barriers and going past the caution tape to look at the damage to the beach for themselves. That is the latest here from Vero Beach on the Treasure Coast here on the other side of Florida. In the meantime, now let me send things back over to Fort Myers.
Well, the warm water isn't helping either.
That's for sure. You know, this issue of algae is always going to be a big deal here for us, and historically has always been a big deal for us as well. A lot of the issues we see with that is man-made cause, runoff of fertilizer and runoff of agricultural waste that goes into our waterways. But there's actually a natural supplement, I guess we could say, of nutrients, and it actually comes from the weather-related topic.
We're seeing it right now.
We've heard a lot about this week, so I wanted to just pause for a moment and do something a little different for you here at 6:15 and talk about why the Saharan area air layer could even have nutrients. As you know, the Saharan air layer originates in Africa. So this story here I'm going to tell you involves things like geography and a whole lot of history as well. Specifically, if you want to look for where the nutrients are coming from the Saharan air layer, you have to look specifically here over the country of Chad, and more specifically right there where you see Lake Chad. Now, Lake Chad is a disappearing lake. It looks big right now, but thousands of years ago, it was much bigger. It incorporated, in fact, a large portion that today is known as the Baudelaire Depression. And inside this former area that was once a lake are a lot of nutrients from things that used to live in this lake thousands of years ago. Now, since it's just a bunch of dust in a desert area, all those nutrients are simply waiting here like in a big reservoir for the winds to come along and pick them up. Now, in the country of Chad, there's a number of areas of mountains here in the northeast corner of the country. As the prevailing winds move across Chad, they make almost a wind tunnel of sorts that scoop up this nutrient-rich soil here in this part of Africa and launch it into the atmosphere. This nutrient-rich soil then and this nutrient-rich dust is then put along with all the other dust particles that are moving off of the Sahara Desert of Africa and then move their way westward across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, in this depiction here, the higher the concentration of Saharan air, the darker the shade of brown is. So obviously, the highest concentration of these nutrients are moving across areas off the west coast of Africa. Notice where they also go, though, down here in South America. The Saharan air layer is very important to the environment of South America, areas like Brazil, by providing them with nutrients. The thing is, though, is that what helps some areas can harm other parts of the world. So when we have a lot of Saharan air over top of the Gulf of Mexico, the same nutrients that are beneficial for things like in the Amazon are also being deposited into the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a growing field of research about how the Saharan air layer could be throwing some natural fertilizer, if you will, into the Gulf of Mexico and potentially tying into the algae issue that we oftentimes have here. Obviously, the man-made stuff is what's really putting it into turbo drive, but the Saharan air layer, because of a lake thousands and thousands of years ago, has nutrients in it that can also play a role. All right, let's get back here to normal now and talk about the weather outside right now. As you look live, you'll notice that somewhat milky appearance to the sky today, and that, of course, if you've lived in Florida for a while, is a telltale sign that Saharan air layer is in pretty high concentration up and above your head. You'll notice that the radar picture over Lehigh Acres, all of Lee County, all of southwest Florida, very quiet tonight. Just how it's going to stay for the majority of us for the rest of the night tonight, as not only does that Saharan air layer give us nice sunsets, keep the tropics quiet, throw a few nutrients into the Gulf of Mexico, it's also a very stable air mass. So we really don't see much in the way of cloud cover. And of course, as you saw this afternoon, we really didn't see much in the way of shower or thunderstorm activity as well. Now, this Saharan air layer is on the move, and tomorrow it starts to move away from us. And as it moves away from us, your opportunity for seeing some isolated thunderstorms starts to work back into the forecast. Take a look at it here in Futurecast mode. Again, the darker the shade of brown, the higher the concentration of the Saharan air layer right over top of you. So once we get to about 5, 6 o'clock tomorrow night, it's pulling away from us. The farther away it is from us, again, the better your chances will be for some showers and thunderstorms. With that in mind, Futurecast for you in the morning tomorrow, as you'd expect, keeps things pretty quiet. We see a few clouds develop by lunchtime, and then in the afternoon, particularly in points south of the Caloosahatchee, that's where your best chances will be for some isolated showers and thunderstorms, again, as that Saharan air layer pulls away from it. All right, now let's take a look at how things play out in the 7-day forecast. Limited influences of the Saharan air layer this weekend, so expect at least a few downpours and thunderstorms in the afternoon, but check out those temperatures. When you see 95s and 96s in the forecast like you do on Sunday and Monday, those dates are closer to the record for those particular days as compared to the average high of only 92 for late July and early August. Peter?